And so we realized that there was 4 pillars to this idea of getting enhanced radiation protection. The first and foremost, and I can tell you, unfortunately mid-career and things like that also make you more in charge of things. I'm not quite sure it's supposed to be that way, but once you become cath lab director, service line director, you start leading groups of individuals, you realize that they're your responsibility. And in fact, young me didn't know that they were my responsibility, but older me certainly does. And in fact, it's not just my colleagues that I have to go say, hey, you did a dumb thing, don't do that again. Whether it be behavior, most of the time, or technique related, it's how are my nurses? How are my techs? And in fact, their well-being becomes more of what I spend my day-to-day in that service line director position, actually, than my colleagues themselves. And so if we are going to do something, whether it's with a new radiation protection device, it has to involve everyone, right? It can't just be the physician, right? It can't just be the physician and the tech, right? They're always the ones all chummy, sitting there talking, and the nurses over there like, hey, or the radiographer. It's got to involve everyone, right? Because everyone is involved in this. Everyone gets radiation. Everyone gets orthopedic issues. So the entire team has to be protected. We can't have people cowering behind shields and all this while the rest of us get to jump around with no lead. It has to involve the entire team. The next is it has to be seamless. And that's one thing as you go along, you realize that things that impede workflow don't get used. We can all think of different devices. If you've been in the game long enough, they're really exciting up front, and then they're a bit of a pain to use, and where do they end up? Hallway, back of the lab. Sometimes your administrator comes down and is like, hey, we spent $100,000 on that. What's that? And you're like, don't worry about it, it doesn't work anymore. So what we can't do is have something like that, right? It has to be seamlessly integrated into the workflow. The reason for that is you got to get cases done, and sometimes people come in really sick. If it takes too long to set up, what are you doing? You're not going to use it, right? The third thing is it has to have procedural versatility. And this is, again, something as you go along, you realize that there's very few cath labs in our world that are simply there for coronaries, right? You just go in, I just do coronaries here, that's it. Now, at some large labs, that may be the case, but the reality is in most of the working world, you got a lab that does coronaries. Sometimes you got to do some structural in there. You might actually have some vascular surgeon doing endo work in there. In fact, you may have EP colleagues who want to come implant a device that really ticks you off because sometimes it takes a long time and you're trying to get your studies done. Whatever you use has to be versatile. It has to work in all those different situations, because anytime you say, oh, well, it doesn't work in this case, so we'll just put it off to the side, that happens repetitively. Again, this device becomes defunct and it's not used. And one thing you realize, especially when we're talking about not small amounts of money, is that it has to work with every physician, every team, every time. And that is how you make a difference. It has to be something that you don't even realize is in the room that you're working with. And then finally, and this is the base, this is the bedrock, this is what everything is built on, there has to be robust data, right? It can't just be, well, I did this thing, I had some numbers, it looked really good, great. It's got to have data in all these scenarios, protecting everyone and all these different types of procedures.